all people of all genders and who have all body parts who say something along the lines of, I am masturbating too much and I am either uncomfortable about it, I feel so guilty, I feel ashamed, I feel like I'm committing a sin. People feel really ashamed at how much that they are finding pleasure in their lives. Here I am to tell you, if you feel like it and if it's good for you, go masturbate. That's what I want to say.
Hi, Danielle.
Hi, Danielle.
Hello. How's everyone doing?
Good. How are you?
Very good. Happy to be here. Thank you so much. We have a lot of different time zones here, so I'm very happy that we were able to all connect.
Awesome. Let's just get straight into it, Danielle. Can you, Danielle, or at Sex Ed with DB on Instagram or TikTok that people know you of, welcome. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Again, Danielle, DB, she, her pronouns. I was born and raised on Long Island in New York. And when I was 15, I moved to California with my family. So, did my last 2 years of high school there and then went to UC Berkeley for my undergrad, got a degree in film and media studies with a minor in education, and always knew that I really loved storytelling and, became through many challenges and fun times, the creator, executive producer, and host of the Sex Ed with DB podcast. We are a feminist podcast bringing you all the sex ed you never got through unique and entertaining storytelling, centering LGBTQ and BIPOC folks who are experts. And I also have my master's of public health. I'm a sex educator. My master's of public health is from Columbia with a focus in sexuality and reproductive health. So that's a little bit about me and my background.
Can you also describe your sexual self in 3 words for us?
I would say my sexual self could be described as insatiable, one.
Oh, nice.
Strong, in tune, I would say.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on the strong part? How is strong different from insatiable?
Yeah. So I think when I think of insatiable, I think of I could get in the mood a lot, or if I can't, then when I am in the mood, I just I'm really, really into it. I'm really loving whatever I'm kind of feeding my body that's pleasurable. Strong, I would say I really have a strong conviction and know my body pretty well to know what gives me pleasure, and the ways in which that I advocate for myself for pleasure are very strong. It's all, it's not, a linear thing. I think it's very important to share that there are some parts of me that feel stronger than others, right? It's not a whole thing that is different from other gray areas and complexities in my life and identities. But I think generally advocating for your needs and what gives you pleasure is super important.
Oh, definitely. Yes.
Actually, did you always knew you were strong, or did that develop later on in the years?
I think that was something that in terms of self sex and sex with myself and masturbation and really getting in touch literally and figuratively with my body, that has always been strong. I think even if there has been shame around it, because I think I definitely experienced that as a young person and a lot of people experience that, and that's totally normal in our taboo culture when it comes to sex. But I do think that with partners, that was something that had to grow, and really with, being with the right partner now who really is, advocates for my pleasure just as much as I do, which is super important.
So Danielle, we want to kind of talk a little bit about the beginning of Sex Ed with DB. So when we were doing a bit of research into you, and we read that you actually went on a trip to Israel, and there you had an encounter with a rabbi, and you were inspired by that experience to start. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to share. That's right. So after I graduated from college, I went to Israel for a year to teach English. And, we could definitely talk about that and the complexities around that experience at a separate time, because obviously I don't want to act like, oh, it was gravy and it was super easy and there is nothing bad going on there, because obviously there's a lot of things to talk about there. But at the time, I went to learn Hebrew, get to know my family. My grandma and aunts and uncles and 9 first cousins and extended family are all there. So I wanted to get to know them and at the same time have kind of a gap year and figure out what I wanted to do next while teaching. And so my teaching cohort went on a field trip for a day to this really religious community in Jerusalem called the Jerusalem of the Bells. Essentially, we were toured around the community by a main rabbi who was there, and kind of shared, hey, this is our temple. These are our traditions. This was an ultra Orthodox rabbi, so way more religious than anyone who was on the teaching cohort. And that being said, the rabbi kind of offhandedly stated to us, yeah, I have 5 daughters, and when they each reach the age of 17 or 18, we marry them off by the matchmaker, and they don't learn about sex until their wedding night, like when they have it for the first time. And we like pray that they get pregnant. And I was 21 at the time, but remember very vividly, it was almost 10 years ago now ish, like 8 years ago. And I kind of like felt an explosion in my body and was like, whoa, that's super messed up. Like, I do not condone that. Like, I can't just like sit in this room while that like vitriol is being spewed out by this person. And so I raised my hand and in kind of a rapid fire, question response said like, what about their consent? Like, what if they don't want that? What if they're not ready to be moms? What then? And he just kind of like waved me off and was like, that's just how it goes here. Next question, moving on. And so it was in that moment where, I knew that my upbringing by a mom who is an OBGYN and the fact that I come from an extended family of educators and facilitators and teachers, that I loved working with young people. And I found in that moment that sex ed was the thing that I wanted to teach young people. And so, yeah, that was my experience in Israel.
Yeah, super inspiring, because how you tell it reminded me from that the Netflix series Unorthodox, where the girl doesn't know anything about sexuality, sex, and suddenly on the wedding night she has to have sex, and she just can't because it's so painful. And because she doesn't know anything about it, and they just don't know. So I find it very beautiful that during your trip that's the way how you were inspired to start this.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's tough just because like, I'm a Jewish person. And like I said, everyone on the trip was Jewish. So it wasn't like a difference in religion. It was kind of like oh, wow, like this exists everywhere, like in my own religion and every other religion, pretty much to the extreme. Right. And so really made me say like, okay, but I want to focus on like my home community and like my own backyard. I don't need to kind of like go, global work is like something that some public health folks do. That's not really something that I want to focus on. I want to be like in my own like neighborhood and in my own community and working with local people to, do that work.
Just one thing, because I was just thinking about, and this doesn't happen in entire of China, but this story, you find these stories back in China as well. So we're all Chinese-ish, have Chinese roots. And then I have a cousin, and then myself, I've never had this before, but she was also, 16 or 17 before she got married off. And she lives in it's not even a tier 3, tier 4, tier 5 city. And it's still pretty normal in some of the cities or villages in China as well to just, until a certain age, we find a good partner for you and you being married off, and then that's it. Nothing else is needed.
Yeah. And it's such a bummer because it's like, do these women like want that? Like if they had the choice, would they like choose to have that? And like maybe because culture and upbringing and like feeling like, in unorthodox, Wingsy mentioned, like if you aren't part of this community, like you're shunned, like you are kicked out forever. And like similar to like Mormonism, right? Where it's like, oh, if you're like refusing to be a part of this culture and this family, essentially, like you don't belong here anymore. So I'm sure that women and people who are in marginalized communities would rather just endure it to prevent from being shunned and kicked out of their own communities.
For most of them, they just live the lives they have. But I think for some of them, they later on at a later age realize that this is maybe not the decision that I should have made, or this wasn't even a decision. And
yeah, so to that point, growing up in a non-Orthodox Jewish household, are Jewish households normally quite conservative, and is sex a taboo?
I would say it really depends. I think like folks who are like queer rabbis and women rabbis, like that is very different. Like that is allowed in Judaism. Judaism like condones abortion. There are like a lot of things, like it's a mitzvah to have sex on Shabbat, and Shabbat happens once a week. So there are definitely a lot of like things that are baked into the religion that I would say are sex positive. And I think generally, like in reform or conservative Jewish households, they wouldn't be to that extreme of, don't have sex, or, you're only learning about this when you're married off. Like, I think that's a very particular religious thing. And I wouldn't even say that like is specific to Judaism. Like, I think that is rampant in like Christian communities and Catholic communities and Muslim communities. Like, every religion to its extreme definitely has misogyny and sexism that are baked into the religion. But my experience growing up Jewish, like, I wouldn't say that was ever a part of my experience or my identity growing up.
So what was it like growing up with an OBGYN? I always have trouble with this word. OBGYN as a mom. I think it's very different from the other kids that just had parents that had normal office jobs, probably.
Yeah, I would say so. I think that, my mom definitely like inspired me to like champion women's health and like women's rights and reproductive rights, like from a very young age, and like normalize conversations around what she was experiencing at the office, right? Like, she would come home with a box of pizza for dinner and be like, oh, that placenta, like it didn't come out, or just like really like talk about her patients in a way that like wasn't identifying them, like no HIPAA, lines were crossed, but very much comfortable to be like, oh yeah, there was so much blood, like, just really sharing like some of the hardships that people do experience with birth, always talking about like, oh, like this was going on with STIs or, pain. And I think like it was great because she was really open about it, but I don't really remember like hearing the positives to her experience as much. Like, it was always kind of like, oh, these are the challenges, like these are the, STIs that I saw, X, Y, and Z. And I think that's probably just the nature of like being a doctor, where you feel like, oh, well, I just need to like fix problems rather than like talk about the pleasure or like the good things that are happening. And I'm sure that, she did say some good stuff of like, oh yeah, like this person, this baby, healthy baby, like definitely like had happy endings to like deliveries. But I feel like in general, and this is like a medical, industrial complex thing, I think it's a lot of focusing on like, ooh, scary STIs, ooh, like, this is like not good stuff. But overall, like, definitely felt really lucky to have her and really like open up the world that was like reproductive health and wellness for me.
Yeah, to that, I feel like what you're doing now is exactly bridging what your mom is doing, but putting it into a language that people can understand and in a way that they can feel as well, versus just like always learning about the science of things. And I think this is what's so awesome about like sex educators. It's like you're not just looking at the biology of things, you're looking at like the psychology and the sociology and human interaction, intimacy and such.
Totally. Yeah. If you really think about like how most students get their sex ed, if they get any at all, right? And that's a big if. It's the gym teacher who like doesn't know what they're talking about, or it's your science teacher who's telling you about anatomy, right? Which is like, that's great. You should be learning about your body parts. But like, why aren't we talking about pleasure? Why aren't we talking about healthy relationships and consent? Why aren't we talking about body image? Like, there are so many parts to growing up that all fall under the category of sex education. And every single person experiences one of those things. Even if you're someone who identifies as asexual, you went through puberty at one point or another, probably, and want to be able to like navigate that as a teen, right? So I think that there are things that apply to every single person under the umbrella of sex education.
Just to continue on that one, because we're talking about this now already, what do you think is the biggest challenge when it comes to sex education, and how should we go around it then?
Can we get a little bit more specific? Do you mean in the world or America? Okay, I'll be happy to answer
Let's
both.
start with America first.
Okay, great. Yeah. So with America, we have the stats, right? Like Guttmacher Institute is a really great organization whose workers are unionizing right now, by the way. Really important to talk about these really big research institutions and also the challenges that they have. So just want to name that really quickly. But they have amazing research on like the state of sex education in the US. And what we do know is that only 17 American states require sex education to be medically accurate. What does that mean? That means that 33 states don't require that. Kind of BS can be told to students without consequence, right? Which is very harmful if you really think about that. There are also a certain number of states, I believe it's something like, I don't know, in the 20s that require comprehensive sex education and comprehensive HIV education. More states than not require abstinence to be stressed when they're talking about sex education. So big issues here, right? So like, are these like things realistic? Like, no, we have the data that show that when abstinence only education curriculum is taught, teen pregnancy rates and STI rates go through the roof. Again, like I think the way in which we present that research is problematic. Like we put judgment on like teens for getting pregnant when like they're a product of their society, and also teens have agency. And if they want to have a child, like that is their prerogative. And we should not base millions of dollars to prevent teens from getting pregnant. It's like, how about we teach about consent and give people birth control access first? So yeah, a lot of like clear issues and a lot of things going on in my head. But in terms of the world, there are such big issues with religion and culture and the inability for parents to have conversations with their young people about sex and about agency that their children or the people they are guardians of have over their bodies. Often feel like unequipped, which maybe they are, but like with the internet, it is really parents' obligation to do a little bit of research, get comfortable, find the books, find the workshops, and sit down with your kid and really have that conversation. Because if they're not getting it from you, then they're getting it from porn. And kids don't know the difference between porn and real life sex until we teach them. Yeah. So it's really, really important for people who are in charge of young people. It is your responsibility to have a conversation or two or many about sex education, especially if they're not getting it in school.
At what age do you think that parents should start teaching kids about sex and sex education globally?
So yeah, what we say as sex educators is that there is age appropriate sex education from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. For kindergartners, it more so looks like, hey, let's talk about the names of your body parts. Because there is data and research that show that when young people know the anatomy and the names of their anatomy and feel able to advocate for themselves, they're less likely to be the victim or on the receiving end of sexual assault. So that's why that is super important and just in general, for kids to just know names of their body is very important. So, maybe in kindergarten when you're 5, hey, this is your vulva, this is your vagina, this is your nipple. Like just really like names of body are not dirty. They're just names.
And that we all do not know yet. Like if you would ask just some random strangers on the street, where is your vulva? Where is the clitoris?
No way. Yeah,
just some
exactly.
Random body part.
Right. And when you're 5 years old, right? Like that's very tangible for kids. If they can see it and they can put a name to it, then that is like very normal and a very empowering piece of information. And are we teaching kids about what sex is at 5? No. Are we teaching them about sharing? Are we teaching them about how to give, consensual touch? Yes. Kids understand the concept of that, of yeses and nos, and feeling like their boundaries can be respected. What it means to be a good friend. There are a lot of ways that you can teach a 5-year-old age appropriate health education is what you would probably call it at that age. And then, when you get up to 4th and 5th grade, maybe that's when you start talking about the menstrual cycle. You start talking about body image. In middle school, it's definitely appropriate to start talking about that in the context of romantic relationships. And, when we're getting closer to 7th and 8th grade and 9th grade, yeah, we do talk about sex and we do talk about STIs and, STI prevention and birth control and all of these things that those folks are experiencing at that time. High school, let's talk about the media. Let's talk about porn literacy, why it's really important for you to be able to know the difference between sex and in real life and porn. There are so many different things that kind of go under these grades, and they all are like age appropriate.
I love this. Like I didn't even realize that we need to start so early, actually. Like if you would have asked me, I would have said primary towards the end, but definitely not when you're in kindergarten because it doesn't feel appropriate. But actually it is. No, it makes totally sense.
And I love how you shared about that. if kids know what the different body parts are, then kids know what's appropriate and not appropriate. Then for both boys and girls, they can also put up their boundaries on an earlier age and say, hey, I'm not comfortable with this. And I think it's something that even in men and also in women at a very late stage in life, it's still very difficult to do. Like sometimes even women of my age would say, hey, I find it very difficult to say what is not okay. And I think if kids can be taught about it at a very early age, that really helps them in their entire progression in life.
Yeah, totally. And one more thing I didn't really mention is that, when we're talking about gender, and obviously we know that names for gender and identities are changing and have changed a lot over the past couple of years and will continue to change. Kids can know their authentic gender identity as young as 5. And so when we notice, what they're wearing, what they want to call themselves, what pronouns they want to use, like the way in which they talk about their identity, it's really important for teachers and for parents to really affirm that and say like, hey, I want to call you and like address you as however you want to be addressed. And I think that is also part of kindergarten and, really being like, okay, like, what do you notice about boys and girls? And let's talk about, there are books that say like, oh, there's a child that doesn't really feel like they fit in either of those boxes. How does that make you feel? There are definitely conversations that you can have with young people to really get them to start thinking and reflecting on their feelings that they have inside.
Yeah, that's super nice also, because I can imagine as a young kid, if you're not as everyone else and you still want to have the feeling that you're accepted, right, by your friends and by society. So I think that's really nice that also and the kids, but also the adults around them can really play into that and really make them feel accepted.
Yeah, in regards to parents and teachers, I feel like there's always a bit of a tension. One feels like it's another's responsibility to educate children on sex education. What are your views on this?
I think it's really interesting to me because to make my views clear, I think that parents and teachers both need to be teaching young people about sex education. But I think the issue is that teachers are not always trained. And as we heard with those Guttmacher stats, are not always required to share medically accurate, non-judgmental information. So depending, I can imagine, I don't have children yet, but I do plan on having children at some point in the next, 5 years. We'll see how it goes. And I imagine that when my kids grow up, and if we're in a school where I get to know the health teacher and I don't feel comfortable about the way in which sex education is being taught, I might want to say like, hey, I want to advocate for a better sex educator. Like it is parents' responsibility also to be involved and know what their kids are learning in school. Teachers are overwhelmed. Also, they have, especially health teachers, have sometimes hundreds of students if they're teaching multiple grades. They are very busy. There's often not enough funding for sex education in schools. So I do think it's like a both and kind of thing. And parents definitely like are on the hook for teaching their kids these things through multiple ways and multiple conversations at home. And I would really encourage parents to like get involved in your school, like ask for the curriculum, see what's going on. If you feel like the health curriculum is not adequate enough, like contact your local Planned Parenthood and see if you can organize like an out of school health session or multiple sessions. Like it would really behoove parents to be involved because kids are at school and they are a captive audience at school. And so you might as well try your best to get awesome, comprehensive education to your kids that way.
Really great information that you shared. Actually, another question was to also ask you what was your biggest learning so far? But I think you just shared so much information already. I feel like that's so much information that we also didn't know actually about sex ed. So I think maybe Eden can just directly ask the next question.
What do you think is the biggest misconception you constantly come across about this topic and topic of sex education? And how do we start changing the narrative for, let's say, the audience in the world?
A lot. I have to go off of like how many DMs we get on Instagram, right? Of like what these folks who follow me are asking and what they're saying. And we get dozens of questions from all people of all genders and who have all body parts who say something along the lines of, I am masturbating too much and I am either uncomfortable about it. I feel so guilty. I feel ashamed. I feel like I'm committing a sin. People feel really ashamed at how much that they are finding pleasure in their lives. And I think, again, like back to religion, back to like as parents and guardians, like not having a conversation with our kids, saying like, hey, this is what masturbation is. And I know this is a little awkward that I'm telling you, but it's really healthy. And it's kind of like a more fun trip to the bathroom. You do it in private, you do it not in front of other people. And as long as it's not taking up your daily responsibilities of work or school or taking care of your kids and you're not hurting anyone, including yourself, go to town. Like that is what we should be telling our young people is like, this is healthy. This is normal. If you want to do this, like every day, if you want to do it twice a day, and again, you're not hurting yourself, hurting other people, and it's not taking over your daily responsibilities, then it's great. There is nothing wrong with feeling good. In fact, it helps. It has effects on positive sleep. It can de-stress you. It can make you feel happier because you have endorphins in your brain and serotonin increases. Like it can relieve cramps on your period. Like these are things that we're not teaching young people. We're just teaching them that it's gross and it's awkward and like everyone does it, but you don't talk about it. And so I just wish that if all people knew that masturbation for most people is healthy and totally normal and doesn't need any intervention, then how would the narrative look? How would young people think of masturbation? How would old people think of masturbation? And there are plenty of people, especially people with vulvas and women and femme identifying people who either do it and feel like they are the grossest person in the world, or they don't do it because they feel like it's gross. And so like, here I am to tell you, if you feel like it, and if it's good for you, go masturbate. That's what I want to say.
I have another question here. I'm going to throw a curveball, but this one is really very pertains to my situation. So we have this company, O Collective, and we produce sex toys. And then people ask us, how did your parents react to it? And then it's very surprising. My parents are very supportive. They're like, do it. If it's your thing, if it earns you any money, do it. I've been trying to get my mom to use a vibrator. She's super supportive. So she tells her friends that I have this company that they should buy it. She buys it for them. But when I tell my mom, you should do it, she's like, no, that's not for my generation. That's something for your generation and you do you, but that's not for me. How do I get her to masturbate as first and also to use a toy? Maybe not even use a toy, but just to get to masturbate. Because that's already like, we're talking about young people. I feel like young people, you can still influence them.
Mold them.
Exactly. But the older generation, they're like, no. This is you and this is me and you do you and I don't want to. You can't talk to them in a way. They're like so stuck in their heads. Like, this is bad. This is dirty. How do
I totally relate with an experience that I've had with an older person in my life when it comes to therapy. Yes, go to therapy. That's great for you. You know, their mindset on other people doing that thing has changed since they were kids. But do they go to therapy? No. I don't have time for it. Right. So it's the same kind of thing of like, okay, like let me maybe have a conversation with you about, you know, why don't you just try it? Like it would mean a lot to me if you just tried it. And at the end of the day, like if you express that to your mom and say like, I know that you think like this isn't for your generation, just try one of these things one time and tell me how you like it. And if you hate it, don't do it again. And if you love it, you can keep this toy. And I think it's kind of like and again, like we're not in the business of forcing people to do stuff. Like if you have that conversation with your mom and she's like, listen, like I have made my boundary clear and like I don't want to, then you can be like, okay, then that's kind of the end of the conversation, right? Like there's only so much you can do. I totally get of like this thing of like, no, like you don't get it. Like you're going to have the best damn orgasm of your life right now.
Yeah.
Like what don't you understand? But all you can do is hand her the product and say like, I understand your qualms. Just try it one time and let me know how it goes.
Okay, I'll try it out.
Yeah, let me know.
I've tried different ways to like push it, but yeah, I'll try this as well. Maybe the more softer way. Like it's your choice. If you want to take it, take it. If you don't want to do it, it's okay.
Exactly.
I think we are done with the sex education questions, right?
Yeah, we can move.
What are your thoughts about the contribution of sexual education to relationships?
I am in a relationship. You are right. Because you have seen my Instagram. I have been in a monogamous relationship with my partner for almost 6 years. He is wonderful. I live with him. We have a cat together. And in terms of sex education and relationships, mind blown. It can add so much, right? We're talking about healthy communication. We're talking about pleasure. We're talking about healthy conflict, right? A lot of people who fight with their partners think, and myself included sometimes because it's so ingrained of like, oh, if we're fighting, there's something wrong, right? But it's really about how you fight. Are you like respectful towards each other? Are you able to kind of come to some sort of conclusion at the end? Are you able to speak calmly to one another? All the time, maybe not. Most of the time, yes, right? Like that should be like the goal. And relationships have conflict. We should all like agree that that is part of a healthy relationship, is like navigating our differences and really figuring out how to come to a consensus. But yeah, other than that, there's so many things that we navigate by ourselves, let alone with another person, right? If we're feeling self-conscious about our bodies, if we're feeling like we are losing or gaining weight or having skin problems or having mental health issues, these are all things that you have to navigate if you have a partner, with your partner in mind, and sharing that information with them so that they can just be in the know or support you or whatever it is. So I just think that, yeah, again, like sex education offers so much, and it definitely offers a lot in relationships.
What are your tips for people in new relationships to kickstart the conversation about sexual wellness, whether for themselves or with each other?
Yeah, I think like really kind of sharing, depending on if you have had sex, whatever that means to you, with your partner who is new or not, like really having an open conversation, like while you're having sex or after the fact, of like, hey, when you like were doing X, Y, and Z thing, like that felt really good. I really loved that. Like to really let them know like what you enjoyed, and, not to critique their performance or anything, but when the time feels right, maybe you can mention, hey, like we didn't really do this last time, but I really love dirty talk. Are you like down to try that with me? Like really offering it as like an opening to a conversation rather than like a demand or like a, hey, like you did this wrong, like do this next time. Like it's about tone, it's about like connection, and it's about openness and honesty. So I just think like really sharing with your partner what feels good, what doesn't feel good, and what you maybe want to try could really offer like some new ground for you. Don't be afraid. I'll say this twice. Don't be afraid to use sex toys in the bedroom with your partner. Don't be afraid to use sex toys in the bedroom with your partner. 75 roughly percent of people with vulvas need or desire clitoral stimulation in order to reach orgasm. That doesn't happen through like penetrative penis vagina sex for most people. What does that mean? That means that the clitoris needs to be stimulated another way, whether that be through hands or mouth or a toy. And it's really important that we normalize sex toys in the bedroom with our partner, especially with cis men, because they need to know that it's not a competition, that they are a team member that is like helping the partner get to where they need to go. And it's just so critical that we start thinking about sex toys in that way rather than something to be afraid of.
And that also comes because when you're in a new relationship, sometimes it's easier to discuss these topics. But what if you're in a long-term relationship and you've been together for a long time, and suddenly you need to, or you want to talk about this? What advice would you give? Because sometimes it could be very difficult to touch those topics.
Totally. And all this, like, take all this with the knowledge that you know your body and your partner way better than I ever will, right? Like, dear viewer, dear listener, this is advice that like I can offer, but everyone's experience is very independent of one another and individual. And so it's really important that you like trust your like knowledge and instincts. That's number one. But definitely like understand also that like the first conversation around this in a long-term relationship or short-term, but especially if you feel like you're in a groove with your partner and then you're bringing up something new, they might get offended. They might get defensive. They might get upset. And like, it's okay to like let them have their feelings around that and figure out like what's a better way for me to communicate new needs that are coming up for me. And really just asking them, like, is it a certain time? Like, do you want me to bring it up, when we're not in the heat of the moment? Do you want me to bring it up in the heat of the moment? Maybe it's a boundaries thing. Maybe that one person is like, hey, I haven't really talked to you about this, but I've been thinking that I want to be like handcuffed and gagged, right? Like maybe that's a really specific BDSM experience that someone wants to experience. Maybe they saw a TV show on the CW with that, something new and kinky. Maybe they heard a new porn that they're interested in and they kind of got titillated by that. And maybe your partner might be taken aback by that request, right? Like it's okay for your partner to be a little surprised. It's not okay for your partner to belittle you, yell at you, tell you that you're weird or that something's wrong, right? It's their responsibility to have their own feelings in like a respectful, kind way. And if they need more time to think about that, then that's okay too. Like, please don't expect like an answer on the spot for your partner to be like, wow, that's exactly what I wanted to do to you, right? Like we can't expect like perfect symmetry with libido, with the acts that we want to do sexually. Sometimes it matches up and it can feel like magic. And most other times it doesn't. And it requires communication and conversations and patience and really like leaving allowances for feelings and reactions. So I think like being patient, being open and honest, really picking and choosing the time at which you have that conversation and, just hoping that your partner is open. Maybe it's the kind of thing where you say, hey, maybe you're kind of weirded out by this or it's different. Let's try it once. And if you don't like it, we don't have to do it again. Same kind of thing with your mom, right? Of like, try this once. And as long as you're like, again, it's the same thing with masturbation. A lot of these themes are coming up, right? As long as it's not like unconsensually hurting you and you can't, get your daily responsibilities done, like go to town, like try it once, see how it goes. And you can kind of have a conversation from there.
I have one last question from my side. Sorry. I have all these curveballs, the questions that we did not record, but they come up in my mind and I feel like I need to ask them right now. People all say that we all need therapy. Like some are being diagnosed and then they're being redirected by their GP. You need to go for therapy. Do you think that all couples need sex therapy?
Need sex therapy. I don't know if I think all couples need sex therapy, but I think all people and including all couples need therapy. And not because I think that everyone has something wrong with them or something to be diagnosed. But I think that if we really think about what therapy is, one time a week or however often you go, maybe every other week, maybe once a month, where you have a space to think and reflect with a professional about experiences that you have to better understand your life. Sounds like everyone would benefit from that, especially people who are of the older generation and don't really like have the ability like younger generations to unpack their trauma and how it's impacting other people. I think that when you are given a birth certificate and a social security number, you should be given a therapist. Like I am one of those people. Like when you're born, like you go to the doctor, right? You go yearly to your gynecologist if you have a vulva. You go to your general practitioner. You go to the dermatologist if you have skin issues. Like we're not treating our mind in the same way. And like therapy is an ongoing practice that similar to exercising and however you want to feel good in your body, that is a way to feel good in your mind. So I'm definitely of the opinion that everyone should, in some capacity, be seeing a therapist.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Thank you for sharing your insight, your story growing up, and what inspired you to become a sex educator you are today. And we've learned so much, and I hope our listeners get to learn a lot from this podcast as well.
Thank you to you all and the O Collective for having me. I'm so excited for more collaborations. This is wonderful.
Same. I love this conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time.